You're a relic from a bygone era, Greta, and frankly, this company needs fresh blood, not dead weight wearing Christmas sweaters. The words sliced through the festive chatter of our annual Christmas party like a blade through wrapping paper, leaving everyone in stunned silence around the decorated conference room that had been transformed into our holiday celebration space. I stood there, my homemade gingerbread cookies still warm in the ceramic dish I'd brought from home, watching as Luke Morrison, the man who thought he ran Morrison and Associates marketing, delivered what he believed was my professional death sentence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was firing someone at a Christmas party in a company that bore his last name, completely unaware that the 72-year-old woman he was humiliating had actually founded this business 35 years ago, when he was still in diapers. The holiday decorations around us seemed to mock the moment, twinkling lights that I'd personally hung that morning, the company Christmas tree that I'd selected and decorated with ornaments representing our biggest client victories over the decades, and the festive red tablecloth that covered the same conference table where I'd made the decision to step back from day-to-day operations 5 years ago and let Luke believe he was in charge. "Clear out your desk after the holidays," Luke continued, his voice carrying that particular brand of cruelty that only comes from someone who's never faced real adversity. "We need people who understand modern marketing, not someone who thinks social media is just for sharing pictures of grandchildren." The assembled staff, 23 people whose paychecks I'd been secretly signing for years, shifted uncomfortably in their holiday attire. Some couldn't meet my eyes, others stared with the kind of morbid fascination reserved for watching car accidents unfold. Beverly Chen, our graphic designer, actually gasped audibly when Luke gestured dismissively toward the door. Anton Rodriguez, our youngest account executive, looked like he wanted to say something but didn't dare challenge the man he thought held everyone's job security in his hands. I adjusted my reading glasses, the same ones Luke had mocked just last week, saying they made me look like someone's confused grandmother who wandered into the wrong building, and smiled. It wasn't the defeated smile of a woman accepting her fate. It was the patient smile of someone who had spent decades building something meaningful, someone who had been quietly watching, documenting, and preparing for exactly this moment. "I see," I said softly, my voice carrying just enough volume for everyone to hear, but maintaining the gentle tone that had led Luke to consistently underestimate me for the past 2 years, since his MBA had convinced him he deserved to run what he assumed was his family's business. "And who exactly will be handling the Patterson Industries account that I've managed for the past 8 years? Luke's confident smirk faltered slightly. The Patterson account was our largest client, representing nearly 40% of our annual revenue, and everyone in the room knew that Patricia Patterson, the CEO, specifically requested that only I handle their marketing strategy. "Anastasia will take over," he said, nodding toward our account manager, though I could see the uncertainty creeping into his expression. Claire Williams, our office manager and the only person besides myself who knew the real ownership structure of the company, stood frozen by the punch bowl, her face pale with what I recognized as barely contained fury. She'd worked for me for 15 years, had been there when I'd made the difficult decision to let Luke believe his charm and business degree had earned him a leadership position he'd never actually been given. What Luke didn't know, what none of them knew except Claire, was that I hadn't just built this company from nothing in my late 30s after my husband passed away, leaving me with 2 young children and a determination to never depend on anyone else for financial security. I hadn't just grown it from a one-woman operation run from my kitchen table into a multi-million-dollar marketing firm with clients across 3 states. I was still the sole owner. Luke Morrison wasn't a Morrison at all. He was Luke Mackenzie, a smooth-talking MBA graduate I'd hired 3 years ago who had charmed his way into a management position by dropping hints about family connections to the company founder that didn't exist. When he'd started introducing himself to clients as Luke Morrison, and no one corrected him, I decided to let the charade continue, curious to see just how far his arrogance would take him. The answer, apparently, was firing the actual owner at the company Christmas party. As I stood there, surrounded by the decorations I'd lovingly placed, holding the homemade cookies I'd baked the night before because I believed in maintaining the family atmosphere that had always been our company's greatest strength, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about Luke's cruelty or his staggering ignorance about who actually signed his paychecks. This was about every older woman who had ever been dismissed as irrelevant, every grandmother who had been patted on the head and told to leave the important work to younger people, every experienced professional who had been pushed aside in favor of someone with more impressive credentials and less actual wisdom. Luke was still talking. Something about bringing the company into the 21st century and eliminating outdated approaches, but I was no longer listening to his words. Instead, I was thinking about the manila envelope locked in my home safe, the one containing not just the original incorporation documents that bore my signature as founder and sole owner, but also the detailed documentation I'd been keeping of Luke's increasingly questionable business decisions, his inappropriate behavior toward female staff members, and most importantly, the evidence of the financial irregularities I'd discovered in our accounts. Irregularities that suggested Luke had been helping himself to company funds he believed no one was monitoring. As the uncomfortable silence stretched through the room, broken only by the soft background music of holiday classics, I realized that this moment, this cruel, unnecessary humiliation, was exactly the catalyst I'd been waiting for. Luke had just provided me with the perfect justification for what came next. I smiled again, this time allowing a hint of something sharper to creep into my expression. "Well," I said, gathering my purse and the still warm dish of gingerbread. "Cookies. I suppose this is just the beginning of a very interesting new chapter." What I didn't say, what Luke would discover soon enough, was that tomorrow morning, when he strutted into what he thought was his office, he would find a different nameplate on the door and a very different reality waiting for him. But first, I had some phone calls to make. The drive home through the snow-dusted streets of Portland felt surreal after what had just transpired. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my modest Honda Civic, the same car I'd been driving for 8 years. Another detail that had convinced Luke I was just some elderly employee barely scraping by, rather than the woman who owned the building he worked in. The Christmas lights decorating the houses in my neighborhood twinkled cheerfully, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my mind. As I pulled into the driveway of my 2-story colonial home, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. My silver hair was still neatly pinned back, my reading glasses slightly fogged from the temperature change, and my green Christmas cardigan, the one Luke had mocked, was adorned with a small holly pin my granddaughter Emma had given me last year. I looked exactly like what I was, a 72-year-old grandmother. What I didn't look like was the founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar marketing firm, which had been my greatest advantage for the past 3 years. Inside my home, I set the untouched gingerbread cookies on the kitchen counter and made myself a cup of tea. Earl Grey, the same blend I'd been drinking every evening for the past 20 years as I reviewed business reports and planned strategies. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was finally going to use the information I'd been carefully collecting, documenting, and organizing in preparation for exactly this kind of moment. I climbed the stairs to my home office, a cozy room that Luke would probably dismiss as quaint if he could see it. The walls were lined with family photos, my business degree from Portland State University, and the framed first dollar I'd ever earned as an independent marketing consultant. What he wouldn't notice immediately were the locked filing cabinets, containing 35 years of business records, or the small safe hidden behind my bookshelf. I opened the safe and withdrew 3 manila envelopes, each meticulously labeled and organized. The first contained the original incorporation documents for Morrison & Associates Marketing, filed in 1988 when I was 37 years old and desperate to create something lasting for my children after losing their father to cancer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My signature was on every founding document, my social security number on every tax filing, my name as the sole owner and shareholder. The irony of the company name had never been lost on me. I'd chosen Morrison, not because it was my married name. I'd kept my maiden name, Hoffman, but because it sounded strong, established, trustworthy. I'd never imagined that decades later, a young man with an MBA and a talent for deception would assume the name gave him legitimate claim to leadership. The second envelope contained what I privately called my Luke file. 18 months of careful documentation of his increasingly problematic behavior. There were screenshots of inappropriate emails he'd sent to female employees, expense reports showing personal purchases charged to company accounts, and most damning of all, evidence of the unauthorized salary increases he'd been giving himself by forging what he believed were my approval signatures. But it was the third envelope that contained the most explosive information. 3 months ago, during one of my late evening cleaning sessions, a cover story that allowed me to access the office computers after hours, I'd discovered Luke's side business. He'd been using our client database and company resources to run his own freelance marketing consultancy, directly competing with us while stealing our proprietary strategies and client relationships. The Patterson Industries account that he'd so confidently assigned to Anastasia? Luke had been secretly pitching Patterson's main competitor, using insider information from our strategy sessions to help them gain market advantage. He had no idea that Patricia Patterson and I had been personal friends for over a decade, or that she'd already called me 3 times today expressing concern about strange approaches from competitors who seemed to know too much about her company's internal plans. As I spread the documents across my desk, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Claire Williams, my loyal office manager and the only person who knew my true identity. "Greta, are you okay?" Her voice was tight with worry. "I can't believe he did that to you in front of everyone. The way he spoke to. It was absolutely disgusting." "I'm perfectly fine, dear," I said, arranging the documents chronologically. In fact, I'm quite grateful to Luke for finally showing his true colors so publicly. There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean that young man just provided me with the perfect justification for ending this charade. Claire, I need you to schedule a meeting with our corporate attorney first thing Monday morning. And please contact our insurance company. We'll need to file a claim for embezzlement and corporate fraud." "Oh my God," Claire breathed. "You found something, didn't you?" I smiled, looking at the evidence spread before me. "I found everything. Luke Mackenzie, and yes, that's his real name, has been stealing from us, lying to our clients, and running a competing business using our resources. He's also been sexually harassing at least 3 female employees and forging approval signatures for his own salary increases. What about the employees? They're all so worried about job security with Luke making random decisions." That was another aspect of Luke's cruelty that had pushed me over the edge. In the past 6 months, he'd created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, threatening jobs and cutting benefits while increasing his own compensation. Good people like Beverly and Anton were walking on eggshells, afraid to speak up or show creativity, because Luke interpreted any initiative as a challenge to his authority. "The employees will be fine," I assured Claire. "In fact, they're going to be much better than fine. Luke Mackenzie's employment is about to be terminated, effective, immediately. And I think it's time for the staff to learn who really owns this company." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began composing 3 carefully worded emails. The first was to our corporate attorney, requesting an emergency meeting to discuss leadership transition and criminal conduct by a senior employee. The second was to our insurance company, initiating a fraud claim that would trigger a formal investigation. The third email was the most important. It went to Patricia Patterson, my old friend and our biggest client. I explained that there had been some internal personnel issues that might affect service continuity, and that I would be personally taking over all communication and strategy work for her account moving forward. I also mentioned that she might want to review her company's information security, as there was evidence that a competitor had gained access to her strategic plans through a breach at our firm. Patricia's response came within minutes. "Greta, I've been waiting for you to take control back. That arrogant young man tried to pitch our competitors last month. I was planning to terminate our contract if things didn't change soon. When can we meet to discuss a new service agreement?" As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the strange journey that had led me to this moment. 5 years ago, when I decided to step back from day-to-day operations, I genuinely thought I was ready to semi-retire. My children were grown and successful, my grandchildren were thriving, and the company was stable and profitable. I'd planned to gradually transition ownership to a qualified successor, perhaps someone from our existing team who shared my values and vision. But finding the right person had proved more difficult than expected. Every candidate I interviewed seemed to see the company as either a quick profit opportunity or a stepping stone to something bigger. None of them understood that Morrison & Associates had always been more than a business. It was a family, a community, a place where people could build meaningful careers while doing work that mattered. When Luke had applied for what was supposed to be a senior account management position, I'd been impressed by his credentials and confidence. His references checked out, his portfolio was solid, and his interview showed genuine enthusiasm for our client-focused approach. I'd had no way of knowing that his entire presentation was built on lies, or that he'd already begun planning to take over what he assumed was a small family business ready for new leadership. The decision to let him believe he was in charge had been partly curiosity and partly caution. I wanted to see how he would handle responsibility, whether he would grow into the role or reveal his true character under pressure. For the first year, I'd held out hope that he might develop into the successor I needed. Instead, I'd watched him systematically undermine everything I'd built while documenting every mistake, every ethical violation, every moment of cruelty toward the people who depended on this company for their livelihoods. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming my company and restoring the culture of respect and excellence that had always been our foundation. Luke Mackenzie had no idea that the elderly woman he'd humiliated at the Christmas party was about to become his worst nightmare. But first, I had one more phone call to make. I picked up my personal phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in over a year. "Ian, it's Greta Hoffman. I know it's late, but I need to ask you a favor. How would you feel about coming out of retirement to help me with a very special project?" Ian Sterling answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep but immediately alert when he heard my name. "Greta? My God, it's been over a year. Is everything all right?" I settled back in my desk chair, looking at the evidence spread before me. "Everything's about to be much better than all right, Ian. I need your expertise for something rather urgent. Remember that young man I told you about last Christmas? The one who'd been making himself comfortable in my company?" There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "The MBA graduate who thinks he owns Morrison & Associates? What's he done now?" "He fired me tonight, at the company Christmas party, in front of the entire staff." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Ian exploded. "He did what? Greta, please tell me you're joking." "I'm completely serious. He stood up in front of 23 employees and told me I was dead weight, who needed to clear out my desk after the holidays." I couldn't help smiling as I recounted it. The poor boy has no idea what he's just unleashed. Ian Sterling had been my business attorney for over 20 years before retiring to his vineyard in Napa Valley. He'd handled everything from my original incorporation to major client contracts, and he'd been the one to structure my company in a way that protected it from exactly this kind of situation. More importantly, he understood Luke's type, the charming sociopath who viewed other people's achievements as his own personal opportunity. "What do you need from me?" Ian asked, and I could hear him moving around, probably reaching for a notepad. Once a lawyer, always a lawyer. I need you to come back to Portland for a few weeks. I'm about to reclaim my company, and I want Luke Mackenzie, yes, that's his real name, to understand exactly how thoroughly he's destroyed his own life. But I want everything done perfectly, legally, and in a way that protects my employees and clients. Mackenzie? I thought his name was Morrison. That's just one of many lies I've uncovered. Ian, this man has been systematically defrauding my company for over a year. He's stolen money, harassed employees, violated client confidentiality, and tonight he made the mistake of thinking he could humiliate me into disappearing quietly. I spent the next hour walking Ian through everything I'd discovered, reading him selected excerpts from Luke's emails, explaining the false expense reports, and detailing the competing business he'd been running using our resources. Ian's questions were sharp and focused, his legal mind immediately grasping the criminal implications of what Luke had been doing. Greta, this isn't just employment fraud. What you're describing could result in felony charges for embezzlement, wire fraud, and possibly RICO violations if he's been coordinating with outside parties. Have you considered involving law enforcement? I want to handle this correctly, I said. Luke Mackenzie is going to face consequences, but I also need to protect my people. Half of them are probably terrified right now, wondering if they'll have jobs after the holidays. I want him gone. I want our money recovered. And I want everyone to understand that Morrison & Associates has always been, and will continue to be, a place where good people can build meaningful careers. And you want him to know exactly who destroyed his little empire, Ian added with satisfaction. I assume you'll be revealing your identity as part of the process? Oh, yes. Monday morning, Luke Mackenzie is going to discover that the grandmother he fired for being outdated is actually the woman who founded the company he's been stealing from. I want to see his face when he realizes that every dollar he's embezzled, every client he's tried to poach, every employee he's mistreated, it all happened under the watchful eye of the actual owner. We spent another hour planning the legal strategy. Ian would drive up from California on Sunday, giving us time to organize everything for a Monday morning confrontation that would be both devastating and legally bulletproof. He'd bring a paralegal and a forensic accountant, and we'd coordinate with both law enforcement and our insurance company to ensure Luke faced both civil and criminal consequences. There's one more thing, I said as we were wrapping up. I want to offer severance packages and job guarantees to any employee who's been mistreated by Luke. Beverly Chen in graphics has been looking for another job because Luke made inappropriate comments about her appearance. Anton Rodriguez hasn't gotten a raise in 2 years, despite being our top performer, because Luke sees him as a threat. I want them to know that their real employer values them. Greta, you realize this is going to be expensive. Legal fees, forensic accounting, possibly having to cover stolen funds while we pursue recovery. Ian, I've been living modestly and saving money for 35 years. Morrison & Associates is debt-free, owns its building outright, and has substantial cash reserves. I can afford to do this right. I paused, looking at a photo on my desk of my late husband holding our newborn daughter. Besides, this isn't just about money. It's about proving that experience and integrity still matter, even when they come in a package that people want to dismiss. After we hung up, I spent several more hours organizing my evidence and preparing for what would be a very different kind of week than Luke was expecting. I printed multiple copies of every document, organized them into clear chronological sequences, and prepared summaries that would make the scope of Luke's misconduct impossible to deny or minimize. Around 2 a.m., I received a text message from an unknown number. Mrs. H., it's Beverly from work. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened tonight. You didn't deserve that. Some of us are talking about looking for new jobs because we can't work for someone who treats people that way. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. Beverly Chen was 28 years old, talented, creative, and exactly the kind of person I'd built this company to support. The fact that Luke's cruelty was driving away good people like her only strengthened my resolve. I typed back, "Dear Beverly, please don't make any hasty decisions about your career. I have a feeling next week is going to bring some very positive changes to our workplace environment. Trust me when I say that people who treat others with respect and kindness will be rewarded, while those who don't will face appropriate consequences." Her response came immediately. "I hope so. You've always been the heart of this company, and seeing you treated that way tonight made all of us realize how toxic things have become." The heart of the company. I'd never thought of myself that way, but perhaps Beverly was right. For 3 years, I'd watched Luke try to transform Morrison and Associates into a typical corporate environment. Cutthroat, hierarchical, focused on short-term profits rather than long-term relationships. I'd documented his failures while hoping he might learn and grow, but tonight had proven that some people are simply incapable of understanding that business success doesn't require cruelty. As I finally prepared for bed, I reflected on the strange irony of the situation. Luke Mackenzie thought he'd fired a troublesome elderly employee who didn't understand modern business practices. In reality, he'd just declared war on a woman who'd spent 35 years building something meaningful, who had the resources to fight back, and who had finally been given the perfect justification to stop playing nice. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming not just my company, but the values that had always made it special. Luke had no idea that his moment of triumph at the Christmas party was actually the beginning of his complete professional destruction. But he was about to learn. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood as I sat in my kitchen reviewing the timeline Ian and I had developed. By 7 a.m., I'd already received 3 more text messages from employees expressing their disgust with Luke's behavior and their concern about the company's future. Each message strengthened my resolve, but also reminded me of the responsibility I carried, not just to expose Luke's crimes, but to protect the livelihoods of good people who deserved better. At 9 a.m. sharp, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Gunther Walsh standing on my porch, holding a box of pastries from the bakery downtown and wearing an expression that mixed concern with barely contained fury. "Greta," he said, enveloping me in a bear hug. "Claire called me. Last night. I drove up from Sacramento as soon as I heard what that little weasel did to you." Gunther had been my first employee back in 1991, a brilliant graphic designer who'd stayed with the company for 15 years before starting his own agency in California. More than a former colleague, he'd become like a son to me, and his wife. Sarah had been the maid of honor at my daughter's wedding. If anyone understood the heart and soul of Morrison and Associates, it was Gunther. "I'm fine, dear," I said, leading him into my kitchen. "In fact, I'm better than fine. I'm finally ready to stop pretending that Luke Mackenzie deserves the benefit of the doubt." Over coffee and Danish pastries, I walked Gunther through everything. Luke's real identity, the evidence of fraud and harassment, Ian's involvement, and most importantly, the fact that Luke had just fired the actual owner of the company in front of the entire staff. Gunther's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. First came shock, then laughter, then a cold anger that reminded me why he'd been so effective at protecting our creative team from difficult clients. "So let me understand this correctly," he said. "This moron has been stealing from you, harassing your employees, running a competing business, and last night he decided to publicly humiliate you at your own company Christmas party?" "That's an accurate summary, yes. And he has no idea that you're the founder and owner?" "None whatsoever. He genuinely believes he's in charge of Morrison and Associates, and that I was just some elderly employee who didn't understand modern business practices." We spent the next 2 hours developing a comprehensive plan for Monday morning. Gunther would arrive early and quietly inform key employees that major changes were coming, without revealing the specific details. Ian would coordinate with law enforcement to ensure Luke's computer access was terminated before he could delete evidence. Claire would prepare announcements for both staff and clients about the leadership transition. "There's one more thing," I said as we wrapped up our planning. "I want to offer you a permanent position as our creative director and partial ownership in the company. You understand our values, you know our people, and frankly, I trust you to help me rebuild this place the right way." Gunther's eyes widened. "Greta, that's incredibly generous, but are you sure? Taking on a partner at this stage..." "I'm 72 years old, Gunther. I can run this company for another 10 years, but I need to start thinking about succession." Monday morning, 6:30 a.m. I arrived at Morrison & Associates 30 minutes before anyone else, using my owner's key to enter through the back entrance. The building felt different in the early morning silence, not cold or unwelcoming, but expectant, as if it too knew that today would mark a turning point. I made my way to my old office, the one I'd quietly maintained for 5 years while letting Luke believe the corner suite was his domain. Hidden behind a bookshelf was a small monitoring system I'd had installed 18 months ago, after I'd begun suspecting Luke's after-hours activities. What I'd captured in recent weeks had gone far beyond simple embezzlement. As I reviewed the overnight footage on my laptop, my blood ran cold. Luke had been in the office until nearly midnight Sunday, frantically shredding documents and transferring files to external drives. But more disturbing was what the audio had captured during his phone calls, conversations that revealed the true scope of his betrayal. "I'm telling you, Marcus, she's gone." Luke's voice came through clearly on the she recording. "After tonight, there won't be any more interference from that old bat. I can move the Patterson account to your firm by the end of the week." Marcus Hoffman, not our Marcus Rodriguez, but Marcus Hoffman from Pinnacle Marketing, our biggest competitor. Luke hadn't just been running a side business. He'd been actively coordinating with our competitors to steal our clients and proprietary strategies. The recording continued. "The beauty of it is, she trained me on everything. I know all their client passwords, their pricing strategies, their upcoming campaign plans. Once I'm fully in control, I can feed you information for months before anyone realizes what's happening." I felt my hands trembling as the full scope of Luke's plan became clear. This wasn't opportunistic theft, it was industrial espionage. He'd systematically positioned himself to destroy Morrison & Associates from within, stealing not just money, but our competitive advantage, our client relationships, and our proprietary methods. My phone buzzed with a text from Ian. "FBI wants to meet at 7 a.m. New developments require federal involvement. Stay put until we arrive." Before I could respond, I heard voices in the main office. Claire had arrived, followed closely by Gunther. But there was another voice, one that made my stomach clench with anxiety. Luke was here early, which meant he was likely planning to destroy more evidence. I quickly saved the audio files to multiple locations and activated the real-time monitoring system. Whatever happened next, everything would be recorded. Through the monitoring system, I watched Luke enter his office and immediately begin making calls. The first was to Pinnacle Marketing, confirming the meeting he'd apparently arranged to hand over our client files. The second call made my blood freeze. "Jessica? It's Luke. I need you to access the Hoffman Industries files this morning. Pull everything. Contracts, pricing, strategy documents, contact lists. Yes, I know it's irregular, but there's been a change in leadership, and I need those files transferred immediately." Jessica Brennan, our newest junior account manager, had only been with us for 6 months. She was young, eager to please, and completely unaware that Luke was asking her to steal confidential client information. But Luke's third call revealed something even more sinister. "Patricia, Luke Morrison here. I'm calling to inform you that, due to recent personnel changes, Morrison & Associates will be transitioning the Patterson Industries account to a new firm." He was trying to steal Patricia Patterson's account by convincing her there were security issues he'd created through his own criminal behavior. At 7:15 a.m., Special Agent Anastasia Rodriguez arrived with Ian and two other federal agents. I watched from my hidden office as they entered through the main entrance, their presence immediately noticed by Claire and our early arriving employees. The tension in the building was palpable. Everyone knew something significant was happening, but no one except Claire understood the full scope. "Mrs. Hoffman," Agent Rodriguez said as she entered my office, "we need to coordinate this carefully. Based on your recordings, Mackenzie is actively engaged in ongoing criminal activity, which gives us grounds for immediate action. However, we want to maximize our intelligence gathering before he realizes he's been caught." I showed her the live, monitoring feed of Luke's office, where he was frantically copying files while on yet another phone call. "Agent Rodriguez, that man is currently stealing proprietary client information to sell to our competitors. Every minute we wait, he's doing more damage to my business and potentially to other companies." Ian stepped forward with a legal document. "I've prepared an emergency injunction that will freeze Luke's access to all company systems and accounts. Once we serve this, he won't be able to delete or transfer any more files." Agent Rodriguez continued outlining the plan. "At 8 a.m., when most of your staff has arrived, we'll serve the injunction and secure Mackenzie's office. My team will seize his computers and any external storage devices. Mrs. Hoffman, you'll need to be present to verify your ownership of the company and authorize our actions. What about my employees? They're going to be terrified when FBI agents start seizing computers." "That's where I come in," Gunther said, arriving with fresh coffee for everyone. "I've been discreetly talking to key staff members. Beverly, Anton, and Marcus are prepared for something big to happen. They don't know the details, but they know you're involved, and that it's going to be positive for the company." At 7:45 a.m., I watched through the monitoring system as Luke made what would be his final call of the morning. He was speaking to someone at Pinnacle Marketing, finalizing arrangements to hand over our client database that afternoon. The arrogance in his voice was stunning. He genuinely believed he'd successfully eliminated the only obstacle to his plan. "Everything's on schedule." "Marcus," Luke was saying, "the old woman won't be a problem anymore, and I'll have full control of all client relationships by this afternoon. This is going to be the biggest intelligence coup your firm has ever received." At exactly 8 a.m., Agent Rodriguez knocked on Luke's office door. I stayed in my hidden office, watching through the monitoring system as Luke's confident expression transformed into confusion, then alarm, as 3 FBI agents entered his space. "Luke Mackenzie, I'm Special Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises and seize electronic equipment in connection with an ongoing investigation into corporate espionage and embezzlement." The color drained from Luke's face. What? This is some kind of mistake. I'm Luke Morrison, the owner of this company. You can't just— Sir, please step away from the computer and place your hands where we can see them." Agent Rodriguez looked toward the door where I was waiting. "Actually, Mr. Mackenzie, there's someone here who'd like to clarify that particular misconception." I took a deep breath, straightened my navy suit jacket, and walked into Luke's office. The look on his face when he saw me was everything I'd imagined, and more. Complete, total shock, mixed with the dawning realization that his entire world was about to collapse. Walking into the main office area felt like stepping into the eye of a hurricane. 23 employees stood in small clusters, their faces showing a mixture of confusion, concern, and curiosity. Some were whispering among themselves. Others stared openly at the FBI agents moving equipment out of Luke's office. Beverly Chen looked pale and shaken, while Anton Rodriguez kept glancing toward the door as if considering whether to leave. "Everyone," I called out, my voice carrying the authority that I'd kept hidden for 3 years. "Please, gather in the main conference room. I need to explain what's happening here." As they filed into the conference room, the same room where Luke had humiliated me just 3 days earlier, I caught Claire's encouraging nod. Gunther positioned himself near the back, ready to support whatever came next. Ian remained in the hallway, coordinating with the federal agents. I stood at the front of the room, looking at faces I'd come to know and care about over the years. These weren't just employees. They were people who had trusted this company with their careers, their financial security, their professional growth. They deserved the truth. I know you're all confused and probably frightened by what you've witnessed this morning, I began. Let me start by assuring you that your jobs are secure, your benefits are intact, and Morrison & Associates will continue operating without interruption. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, but the confusion remained evident. On their faces, what you've seen this morning is the culmination of an investigation into serious criminal activity by the person you knew as Luke Morrison. His real name is Luke Mackenzie, and he has been arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and corporate espionage. Beverly raised her hand tentatively. Mrs. Hoffman, I don't understand. Luke said he owned the company. How can you guarantee our jobs? Because, I interrupted gently, I am the actual owner of Morrison & Associates. I founded this company 35 years ago, and I have never transferred ownership to anyone. The silence that followed was profound. I could see minds racing, trying to reconcile this revelation with everything they thought they knew about their workplace. Anton was the first to speak. You're the founder, but Luke always said. He told us he inherited the company from his family. Luke Mackenzie lied about virtually everything, including his name and his relationship to this company. 3 years ago, I hired him as a senior account manager. Somehow, he began presenting himself as ownership, and I allowed the deception to continue because I wanted to observe his true character before making him a partner in the business. And what did you discover? Marcus from accounting asked, his voice tight with emotion. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. I discovered that Luke Mackenzie was not worthy of partnership, leadership, or even basic employment. Over the past 18 months, he has been stealing money from company accounts, sexually harassing female employees, and selling our proprietary client information to our competitors. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Beverly's face had gone completely white, while several other women exchanged knowing glances. Mrs. Hoffman, Jessica Brennan spoke up from the back, her voice shaking. This morning, Luke asked me to copy confidential client files. He said there had been leadership changes and that he needed them transferred immediately. I gave him the files because I thought he had the authority. Jessica, you're not in trouble, I assured her quickly. You were manipulated by someone who was deliberately deceiving you about his role in this company. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected call that would reveal just how extensive Luke's network of deception had been. I was in my office, the real owner's office I'd finally reclaimed, reviewing employee files with Gunther when Agent Rodriguez called with news that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Hoffman, we've made an arrest in connection with Luke Mackenzie's case that I think you need to know about immediately. Another arrest? I set down my coffee cup, giving Rodriguez my full attention. We arrested Marcus Hoffman from Pinnacle Marketing last night. During questioning, he revealed something that changes the scope of this case significantly. Mackenzie wasn't just selling your client information. He was part of a systematic scheme to destroy Morrison & Associates entirely. I felt the familiar chill of betrayal, though by now I thought I'd experienced every possible variation of Luke's treachery. What kind of scheme? According to Hoffman, the plan was for Mackenzie to drive Morrison & Associates into bankruptcy through a combination of client theft and reputation destruction. Once your company failed, Pinnacle Marketing would acquire your physical assets and remaining client contracts for pennies on the dollar. Gunther looked up from the files he'd been reviewing, his expression darkening. So Luke wasn't just stealing from us, he was systematically destroying us. It gets worse, Agent Rodriguez continued. Hoffman claims they've done this to at least 3 other small marketing firms in the Pacific Northwest over the past 5 years. They place someone inside the target company, usually in a management role, and then orchestrate its destruction from within. The magnitude of what I'd narrowly avoided began to sink in. If I hadn't been secretly monitoring Luke's activities, if I hadn't maintained ownership while letting him believe he was in charge, Morrison and Associates would have become another victim in this elaborate corporate murder scheme. Agent Rodriguez, how many people are involved in this network? We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests at least 7 individuals across 4 states. Mrs. Hoffman, your willingness to document everything and cooperate with our investigation may have helped us break up a significant, organized crime operation. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Gunther reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. Greta, you realize what this means? Your decision to play along with Luke's deception, to document everything, you didn't just save your own company. You may have saved other businesses from being destroyed. I just wanted to protect my employees, I said softly. I had no idea we were dealing with something this sophisticated. That's what makes you different from them, Gunther replied. You were thinking about people, not just profit. Claire appeared in the doorway with a concerned expression. Greta, Patricia Patterson is here. She says it's urgent, and she needs to speak with you immediately. Patricia Patterson entered my office looking more shaken than I'd ever seen her. As the CEO of one of the region's largest manufacturing companies, she was normally composed and confident. Today, she looked like someone who'd just discovered a bomb in her boardroom. Greta, thank God you're here. I've been on the phone all morning with other business owners in our association. That man, Luke McKenzie, we think he approached at least 6 other companies with insider information about their competitors. I gestured for her to sit down. What kind of information? Strategic plans, pricing data, client lists, exactly the kind of information that could only come from inside their direct competitors. Greta, I think your former employee was running some kind of corporate espionage ring. Patricia, I need to tell you something. The FBI arrested Luke yesterday, and they've discovered he was part of an organized scheme to destroy small businesses by infiltrating them with corrupt managers. Patricia's face went pale. How many companies has he infiltrated? We don't know yet, but the FBI believes this network has been operating for years. Patricia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did Luke ever approach you directly about transitioning your account to a different firm? She nodded grimly. 3 weeks ago, he suggested that Morrison and Associates might not be the best fit for our evolving needs. He recommended a firm called Pinnacle Marketing, said they had more modern capabilities and could offer better rates. Pinnacle. Marketing is owned by Luke's accomplice. They've been arrested as well. My God, Patricia whispered. If I had listened to him, you would have been paying Luke's co-conspirators to manage your marketing while they used your confidential information to help your competitors. It's an incredibly sophisticated scam. Patricia was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Greta, there's something else. Yesterday, after we spoke, I called 3 other CEOs who used different marketing firms. 2 of them mentioned having employees who had recently suggested switching to Pinnacle Marketing. I felt a chill of realization. Patricia, I think we need to contact the FBI immediately. This network may be much larger than they initially realized. While Patricia made calls to other business owners, I found myself reflecting on the strange chain of events that had led to this moment. Luke's decision to fire me at the Christmas party, his moment of supreme arrogance, had inadvertently triggered the investigation that would expose an entire criminal network. If he had simply continued his patient infiltration and gradual theft, if he hadn't let his ego demand the humiliation of the woman he saw as his only obstacle, Morrison and Associates might have slowly declined into bankruptcy while I remained unaware of the deliberate sabotage. Instead, his need to crush someone he viewed as irrelevant had revealed his true nature to the one person who had the power and resources to stop him. Agent Rodriguez called back an hour later with an update that confirmed our worst fears. Mrs. Hoffman, based on information from Ms. Patterson and other business owners, We've identified at least 12 companies that may have been targeted by this network. We're coordinating with field offices in 3 other states to conduct simultaneous raids tomorrow morning. 12 companies? I couldn't hide my shock. Possibly more. Mrs. Hoffman, your case isn't just about recovering stolen funds anymore. It's become the key to dismantling a sophisticated organized crime operation that has been destroying small businesses across the region. As I hung up the phone, Gunther looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Greta, you've gone from trying to save your own company to helping law enforcement break up a criminal enterprise. Are you prepared for what that might involve? I thought about all the other business owners who had built something meaningful from nothing, who had created jobs and served their communities, only to watch it all crumble because of deliberate sabotage they never saw coming. Gunther, 35 years ago, I started this company because I wanted to build something that would last, something that would provide good jobs for good people. If Luke Mackenzie and his accomplices have been destroying other people's life, work for profit, then yes, I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to stop them. I looked around my office, at the photos of employees past and present, at the awards we'd won for client service, at the evidence of 3 decades of honest work and ethical business practices. Luke Mackenzie had thought he was firing a powerless old woman. Instead, he'd awakened someone who had spent a lifetime building things worth protecting, and who now had the resources and determination to ensure that other builders wouldn't fall victim to the same elaborate deception that had nearly destroyed everything I'd worked for. 6 weeks later, I sat in the federal courthouse in downtown Portland, waiting for the moment I'd been anticipating since that humiliating Christmas party. Luke Mackenzie's trial was about to begin, and I would be the prosecution's star witness, not just as the victim of his crimes, but as the woman whose careful documentation had exposed an entire criminal network. The case had grown far beyond Morrison and Associates. Federal prosecutors had uncovered evidence that Luke's network had targeted over 20 small businesses across 4 states, stealing millions of dollars and destroying countless livelihoods. But today was personal. Today, Luke would learn the full consequences of underestimating a 72-year-old grandmother. Mrs. Hoffman, Prosecutor Sarah Chen approached my seat in the gallery. Are you ready for this? I've been ready since December 18th, I replied, smoothing my navy suit, the same one I'd worn the day Luke was arrested. As we entered the courtroom, I saw Luke for the first time since his arrest. The confident, arrogant man who had publicly humiliated me was gone. In his place sat someone who looked smaller, diminished, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of expensive suits. When his eyes met mine across the courtroom, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine fear. Your Honor, Prosecutor Chen began her opening statement. This case is about more than embezzlement or fraud. It's about a systematic campaign to destroy small businesses through infiltration and betrayal. The defendant, Luke Mackenzie, positioned himself as a trusted employee and eventual leader, all while orchestrating the destruction of Morrison and Associates marketing from within. Luke's defense attorney, a young man who looked barely old enough to practice law, stood up nervously. Your Honor, my client was simply an ambitious employee who made some poor financial decisions. The prosecution is trying to turn ordinary workplace conflicts into a criminal conspiracy. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Ordinary workplace conflicts didn't involve selling client information to competitors or embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars. When I was called to testify, I walked to the witness stand with the same steady confidence I'd shown when confronting Luke in his office. This time, however, there would be no possibility of his escape or denial. Mrs. Hoffman, Prosecutor Chen began, please tell the court about your relationship to Morrison and Associates Marketing. I founded the company in 1988 and have been its sole owner for 35 years. And what was Mr. Mackenzie's actual role in your company? He was hired as a senior account manager in 2021. He had no ownership stake, no authority to make major business decisions, and certainly no right to sell company assets or client information. Yet, he presented himself as the owner of the company? Yes. He began using the last name Morrison and telling clients and employees that he had inherited the company from his family. This was completely false. Prosecutor Chen displayed the incorporation, documents on a large screen. Mrs. Hoffman, whose signature appears on these founding documents? Mine, Greta Hoffman. And whose name appears as the sole owner and shareholder? Mine. Mrs. Hoffman, on December 18, 2024. What did Mr. Mackenzie do? I looked directly at Luke, who was staring at his hands. He fired me. At the company Christmas party, in front of all our employees, he told me I was dead weight and that I should clear out my desk after the holidays. How did that make you feel? Truthfully? I was grateful. His mask had finally slipped completely, and he'd given me the justification I needed to end his employment and expose his crimes. Mrs. Hoffman, did Mr. Mackenzie know he was firing the actual owner of the company? He had no idea. He genuinely believed he owned Morrison and Associates and that I was just an elderly employee who didn't understand modern business practices. The courtroom was completely silent. I could see several jurors shaking their heads in disbelief. Mrs. Hoffman, what happened after Mr. Mackenzie fired you? I contacted the FBI, provided them with 18 months of documented evidence of his criminal activity, and coordinated his arrest. I also immediately reclaimed control of my company and began repairing the damage he had caused. And what was Mr. Mackenzie's reaction when he learned your true identity? I smiled slightly, remembering that moment of perfect justice. He was in handcuffs, sitting in what he thought was his office, when I walked in and explained that he had just fired the woman who owned everything he thought belonged to him. I believe his exact words were, "This is impossible." Mrs. Hoffman, in your opinion, what was Mr. Mackenzie's ultimate goal? To destroy Morrison and Associates completely, steal our clients and intellectual property, and sell our assets to his criminal associates for profit. We weren't just being robbed. We were being systematically murdered as a business. As I concluded my testimony, I looked one final time at Luke Mackenzie, the man who had thought he could dismiss me as irrelevant, who had believed that age and appearance-determined worth, who had tried to destroy something I'd spent decades building. He never saw it coming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, the foreman stood with the kind of gravity that told me everything I needed to know before he spoke a single word. On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of corporate espionage, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. Luke Mackenzie's shoulders sagged with each verdict. His defense attorney placed a hand on his arm, but Luke seemed to have retreated into himself completely. The confident predator who had humiliated me at the Christmas party was gone, replaced by a broken man facing the consequences of his choices. Judge Catherine Williams looked down at Luke with the stern expression of someone who had seen too many. Criminals underestimate their victims. Mr. Mackenzie, you will return in 2 weeks for sentencing. Until then, you will remain in federal custody. As the marshals led Luke away in shackles, he turned back toward the gallery one last time. His eyes found mine, and I saw something that might have been an attempt at an apology, or perhaps just the desperate look of someone finally understanding the magnitude of his mistakes. I felt no satisfaction in his defeat, only a quiet sense that justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, Agent Rodriguez approached me with a satisfaction that mirrored my own. Mrs. Hoffman, I wanted you to know, your case has become a model for how to investigate and prosecute corporate infiltration schemes. We've already prevented 3 other businesses from falling victim to similar operations. How many people were ultimately arrested? I asked. 14, across 4 states. The network was much larger than we initially suspected. Your willingness to document everything and cooperate with the investigation was crucial to breaking the entire operation. Patricia Patterson joined us on the courthouse steps, having stayed for the entire trial as a show of support. Greta, what you've done here goes far beyond protecting your own business. You've saved other entrepreneurs from losing everything they've worked for. 2 weeks later, I returned to the courthouse for Luke's sentencing. Judge Williams had a reputation for fairness, but also for ensuring that punishment matched the crime. As Luke stood before her, looking smaller and more defeated than I'd ever seen him, she delivered words that would stay with me forever. Mr. Mackenzie, you targeted small businesses, the backbone of our economy, and attempted to destroy them through calculated deception. You preyed on entrepreneurs who trusted you, employees who depended on you, and clients who believed in the integrity of the companies you infiltrated. She paused, consulting her notes. Your crimes weren't motivated by desperation or necessity, but by greed and a fundamental disrespect for other people's life work. You saw Mrs. Hoffman as an obstacle to be removed rather than a human being, deserving of respect. I hereby sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will also pay full restitution to all affected businesses, totaling $2.3 million, and you are permanently barred from holding any position of financial authority in any business. 12 years. Luke would be in his late 40s when he was released, his MBA worthless, his professional reputation destroyed. The man who had thought he could steal my life's work would spend the prime of his career in a prison cell, contemplating the consequences of underestimating a 72-year-old grandmother. As we left the courthouse, Ian Sterling, my attorney, who had become such a crucial ally, walked beside me with a reflective expression. Greta, in 40 years of practicing law, I've never seen a case quite like this. The combination of your patience, documentation, and strategic thinking, it was masterful. I wasn't trying to be masterful, I replied. I was just trying to protect something I'd built and the people who depended on it. That's exactly what made it masterful, he said. Luke Mackenzie saw you as a target because he couldn't imagine that someone who looked like you could be formidable. His prejudices became his downfall. That evening, as I sat in my home office reviewing the final legal documents, I reflected on the strange journey from that humiliating Christmas party to this moment of complete vindication. Luke had tried to destroy me because he saw me as weak, irrelevant, easily dismissed. Instead, he had awakened something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. A woman with 35 years of business experience, substantial resources, and an absolute determination to protect what she had built. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Beverly Chen, calling from the office. Mrs. Hoffman, I just wanted you to know, we've had the most productive month in company history. Client retention is at 98%. We've signed 6 new accounts, and employee satisfaction scores are the highest they've ever been. I smiled, looking at the photo on my desk of our team at last month's company celebration, the same conference room where Luke had tried to humiliate me, now filled with genuine joy and professional pride. Beverly, that's wonderful news, but it's not surprising. When people feel valued and respected, when they're not afraid of arbitrary cruelty or having their work stolen, they do their best work. Mrs. Hoffman, there's something I want to say. What you did, standing up to Luke, exposing his crimes, protecting all of us, you showed us what real leadership looks like. After we hung up, I remained in my office for a while, surrounded by the evidence of a life spent building rather than destroying, creating rather than stealing, lifting others up rather than tearing them down. Luke Mackenzie had thought he was firing a powerless old woman. Instead, he had attacked someone who embodied everything he never understood about true success, that it comes from serving others, that leadership means protection rather than exploitation, and that real power lies not in taking what others have built, but in building something worth protecting. 1 year after that fateful Christmas party, I stood in the same conference room, but the transformation was remarkable. The space that had once witnessed Luke's cruelty now hosted our monthly all-hands meeting, where 28 employees, 5 more than we'd had under Luke's reign of fear, gathered to celebrate another record-breaking quarter. Before we review the numbers, I said, looking around at faces that now showed confidence instead of anxiety, I want to acknowledge something important. Today marks exactly 1 year since we reclaimed our company culture and recommitted ourselves to the values that Morrison & Associates was founded on. The applause was spontaneous and genuine. Beverly Chen, now our head of creative services, beamed from her seat at the front. Anton Rodriguez, recently promoted to senior account director, nodded approvingly. These weren't just employees anymore. They were partners in rebuilding something meaningful. Our client retention rate is now 99.2%, Gunther announced, consulting his tablet. We've signed 18 new accounts this year, and our employee satisfaction scores consistently rank in the top 5% nationally for companies our size. But the numbers only tell part of the story, I continued. What matters more is that we've created a workplace where people feel valued, respected, and empowered to do their best work, where creativity is encouraged, not stifled, where integrity isn't just a word on our website, but a principle we live by every day. Claire Williams, still our invaluable office manager, raised her hand. Mrs. Hoffman, I think everyone would agree that the profit-sharing program you implemented has been life-changing for many of us. The profit-sharing program had been one of my first initiatives after Luke's removal. Rather than hoarding the recovered funds and increased profits, I'd decided that the people who made our success possible should share in the rewards. It was a radical departure from Luke's approach of enriching himself while cutting employee benefits. Speaking of life-changing, I said, I have an announcement. As many of you know, I've been working with Ian Sterling to establish the Morrison & Associates Foundation, focused on helping small businesses protect themselves from corporate infiltration and fraud. I clicked to the next slide in my presentation, showing the foundation's logo and mission statement. Thanks to the restitution payments from Luke McKenzie and his co-conspirators, we've been able to provide free security audits, legal consultation, and fraud prevention training to over 40 small businesses across the Pacific Northwest. The room erupted in applause again. Marcus from accounting called out, "That's amazing, Mrs. Hoffman. You're turning Luke's crimes into something positive for other businesses." That's exactly right, Marcus. Luke tried to destroy not just our company, but the entire ecosystem of small businesses. Now we're using the resources we recovered from his crimes to make other entrepreneurs stronger and more resilient. Jessica Brennan, the young account manager who had unknowingly helped Luke in his final hours, raised her hand. "Mrs. Hoffman, I've been working with some of the Foundation's client businesses, and several of them have told me they never would have survived infiltration attempts without the training we provided." Which brings me to my next announcement, I said, unable to hide my smile. The Foundation has received a $2.5 million grant from the Small Business Administration to expand our fraud prevention program nationwide. We'll be hiring 15 new consultants over the next year, and I'm pleased to announce that Jessica will be leading our new Early Warning Systems division. Jessica's eyes widened in shock and delight. "Really? Mrs. Hoffman, Thank you. This is incredible." As the meeting continued with department updates and project reviews, I found myself reflecting on the journey from that humiliating Christmas party to this moment of triumph. Luke's attempt to destroy me had instead catalyzed the creation of something far more meaningful than just a successful marketing company. We had become a symbol of resilience, a proof point that experience and wisdom could triumph over arrogance and deception, and most importantly, a force for protecting other businesses from the kind of predators who had once threatened our existence. After the meeting, as employees filtered out with renewed energy and purpose, Gunther approached me with a thoughtful expression. "Greta, I've been thinking about something. Do you realize that Luke's decision to fire you at that Christmas party was probably the best thing that ever happened to Morrison and Associates? I considered his words carefully. You're right. If he had continued his patient infiltration, if he hadn't let his ego demand my public humiliation, he might have succeeded in destroying us slowly, quietly, without anyone realizing what was happening. Instead, his moment of supreme arrogance gave you the justification and motivation to not just stop him, but to build something better than what existed before, and to help other businesses avoid the same fate, I added. Luke thought he was removing an obstacle. Instead, he created an adversary who had the resources, experience, and determination to not just survive his attack, but to turn it into a force for good. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I took one last look around the conference room where it all began. The Christmas decorations were up again. This year's holiday party would be a celebration of genuine accomplishments and shared values, not a stage for cruelty and deception. Luke Mackenzie was serving his sentence in federal prison, but his legacy lived on in every business we'd helped protect, every employee who felt valued and secure, and every client who benefited from our renewed commitment to excellence. He had tried to fire a powerless old woman. Instead, he had awakened something far more powerful than he could have imagined, a force for justice, protection, and positive change that would outlast any individual career or company. 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the National Small Business Conference in Washington, D.C., looking out at an audience of 500 entrepreneurs, business owners, and policymakers. The woman who had once been dismissed as dead weight was now delivering the keynote address on corporate security and resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, I began. My name is Greta Hoffman, and I'm here to tell you about the most valuable lesson I've ever learned in 37 years of business. Never underestimate the power of being underestimated. The audience chuckled, but I could see the serious attention in their faces. These were people who understood the vulnerability of building something from nothing, the constant threat of those who would take rather than create. 3 years ago, a young man with an MBA and a talent for deception thought he could steal my life's work because I looked like someone's grandmother. He was right about one thing. I am someone's grandmother. What he failed to understand is that grandmothers are survivors, protectors, and builders who have learned that true strength often comes in unexpected packages. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, showing a photo of Morrison and Associates' current team. Vibrant, diverse, confident. Today, I want to share 3 lessons that can help protect your business from the kind of predators who see opportunity in your trust and who mistake kindness for weakness. First, document everything. Not out of paranoia, but out of prudence. The evidence that saved my company wasn't gathered after I suspected fraud. It was collected as part of good business practices. Every financial transaction, every major decision, every concerning behavior should be recorded. The investment in proper documentation systems is nothing compared to the cost of rebuilding from destruction. Second, never confuse delegation with abdication. I learned this the hard way. Stepping back from day-to-day operations doesn't mean stepping away from oversight. Trust your people, but verify their actions. Empower your team, but maintain accountability. Systems. The moment you stop paying attention is the moment someone with bad intentions will take advantage. Third, and most importantly, your experience is your superpower, not your weakness. In a culture that worships youth and innovation, it's easy to feel like experience is outdated. But experience teaches patience, pattern recognition, and the wisdom to know when something doesn't feel right. The young man who tried to destroy my company saw my age as proof of irrelevance. Instead, it was the foundation of the strategic thinking that brought him down. I paused, looking directly at the audience. I want to end with this thought. Luke Mackenzie fired me because he thought I was powerless. He saw a 72-year-old, Woman who brought homemade cookies to work and assumed I couldn't understand modern business. His prejudice became his downfall because he never imagined that the grandmother he dismissed had the resources, intelligence, and determination to not just stop him, but to build something better from the ashes of his attempted destruction. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 2 minutes. As I stepped down from the podium, I was approached by dozens of business owners with stories of their own. Near misses with corporate infiltration, suspicious employees, close calls with disaster. But what moved me most was a young woman, probably in her 20s, who waited until the crowd had dispersed before approaching. "Mrs. Hoffman," she said, "my grandmother started a small bakery in 1985. Last year, someone tried to force her out, claiming she was too old to understand modern business practices. After hearing your story, I realized she's not too old. She's too smart to be fooled. Thank you for showing us that wisdom and experience are strengths, not weaknesses." As I flew home to Portland that evening, I reflected on the strange journey from that humiliating Christmas party to this moment of recognition and purpose. Luke Mackenzie had tried to end my career because he saw me as obsolete. Instead, he had launched me into the most meaningful phase of my professional life. The woman he tried to silence had found her voice. The business he tried to destroy had become stronger than ever. The grandmother he dismissed as irrelevant had become a force for protecting others from suffering the same attacks. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding our challenges, but from transforming them into something greater than we ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.